Hello and welcome to episode 114 of the Food Fight Show. No, this podcast is not dead. We are still going. In fact, we've got a great episode planned for today and a couple of other great episodes coming up in our schedule. So hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time it is where you are. I'm Nathan Harvey, co-host of the Food Fight Show. I'm coming to you live today from my home office in Annapolis, Maryland. With me today, I have my co-host, Nell Shamrell. Hi, Nell.
Hey, Nathan. It's great to be here. I'm coming to you from my home office in Seattle, Washington. Great to be back on the Food Fight Show and looking forward to the lineup we've got ready to go before Chef Conf.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting stuff. Speaking of Chef Conf, well, we won't speak of Chef Conf yet. I'll come back to that in a minute. But what I did want to do before introducing the rest of our panelists is just talk about some upcoming events that Chef is working on, as well as some of our panelists are working on. So coming up March 15th and 16th in London, there are actually two conferences that are running sort of co-located conferences, if you will. FinTech Code and Retail Code. We'll have a bunch of chefs there. So if you're in the financial industry or the retail industry and based in London, definitely check out those conferences. Also coming up this week on March 15th, March Madness, the NCAA basketball tournament kicks off. I, as well as a couple of other chefs and our friends at PagerDuty and Datadog, will all be in New York City having a March Madness viewing party. So from 11 to 6 during the day, come by, let's talk automation, let's talk DevOps, and let's talk basketball. Following that, on March 20th in Austin, Texas, the Microsoft DevOps user group meeting is going to talk about continuously deploying .NET applications with Habitat. That sounds pretty cool. If you're not familiar with Habitat, check out some of our recent shows where we've talked about Habitat. That's all about how you build, deploy, and manage applications. And it works just as well on Windows as it does on Linux, which is super awesome to see. Other events we have coming up: the Computing DevOps Summit, March 21st in London. DevOps Days Baltimore, March 21st and 22nd in, well, as the name implies, Baltimore. And then, Nell, you mentioned Chef Conf. That's coming up May 22nd through the 25th in Chicago, Illinois. Early bird tickets are still on sale, so you should get yours now. Get them as soon as you can before the prices go up. And if you want to look at any other events that Chef is working on, where might you find chefs around the world? Check out events.chef.io. And now for today's panel, or today's episode, we're going to talk about this thing called incident management. And we have some partners over from BlackRock 3 who actually, as it turns out, they have an upcoming public workshop that they're going to be offering March 22nd through 23rd in Oakland, California. And the name of that workshop is IT Incident Command and Incident Management. You can check out the show notes for links into that workshop. I would highly recommend it. We've done a lot of training with these guys before and know of a bunch of our customers that have used their training to really make their incident management much, much better. So with that, let's go ahead and move over to our panelists and get some introductions going here. So Ron, welcome to the Food Fight Show.
Hey, Nathan, thanks for having us today. And then with me today is Rob Schnepp and Chris Hawley. So let me toss it over to Rob and then Chris, and then come back to me.
Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, as Nathan said, and I'm happy to be on a food fight that is not going to land me in a principal's office at some point. So this is really new territory for me. I'm happy to be here, and my background is from the fire service, and as the name implies, incident management is about how IT professionals manage problems just like we do in the fire service. So I spent my entire career responding to fires and all different kinds of crazy things out there. 30 years in the business as a special operations chief out here in the East Bay near Oakland, California. And I will toss it to Chris.
Greetings, this is Chris, and I'm coming from Baltimore. And I have a background very comparable to Rob's, except I come from the East Coast and have a special operations background in the fire service, but also spent quite a few years with the FBI, Secret Service, ATF, and a number of government agencies, 45 some government agencies all over the world, doing weapons of mass destruction incident management work.
Yeah, and I'm Ron. I'm up in the San Francisco Bay Area, north of the bridge in Marin County, and my background's complementary to Rob's and Chris's, so think of them as 80% in the fire service and 20% in industry because of all their specialty work in the area of hazardous material and weapons of mass destruction. Think of me as just the opposite. I've spent 80% of my time in critical infrastructure. I was on the founding team of Level 3 communications, of MFS communications. So I worked in oil and gas on the Alaska pipeline, high voltage power systems, terrestrial subsea fiber networks, wireless networks, and extensive time in the capital markets, both leading capital markets teams on issuance of new securities of about $14 billion worth of them, and led operational and technical due diligence teams on about $19 billion worth of mergers. So with that, we're super excited to be here, and we've worked with Nathan and the crew over at Chef over the years, and they're super excited to continue working with how the industry thinks about operations, how it thinks about maximizing uptime, and incidents are one of the things that get in the way of uptime. So we're all about that.
Yeah, in fact, Ron, I think we met at the very first Chef Conf where you gave a keynote on exactly this topic.
This was the very first Chef Conf, and it was at the Marriott in Burlingame, California, on the run near the runway to the San Francisco International Airport, and it was the lunch keynote, in fact.
Yep, that's exactly right. Hey, so everyone who's listening or watching now, I would like to let you know that we have a community Slack for the Chef community. So if you go over to community-slack.chef.io, you can sign up for that Slack workspace or that Slack team. And once you're in there, if you have questions for our panelists, you can drop into the Food Fight channel there. We'll make sure to bring your questions into the show. Speaking of questions, Nell, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. So I know there's a lot of things that come to mind when you think of incident. I mean, for me, in my job as an engineer at Chef, an incident is the database going down. Yet I have been caught, this was a few years ago when American Airlines computer systems went down. And I've always said I take comfort because with the systems I touch, things don't literally go down, like come down out of the sky down. So with that in mind, you know, all these different categories, all these things we hear called incidents. What is an incident? What do you define as an incident?
Well, I'll take that one on. This is Rob. I think first of all is to figure out what incident and incident management is not. So first of all, incident management is not software. Incident management is not an application. It's not anything other than a way that people work with people to solve or resolve any kind of an incident. And your question about what is an incident is an interesting one. We talk about this quite a bit in our training, in that think about it this way, and I'll start the discussion this way. If you get your head in the right mindset as a responder, you will have the perspective that we have in the fire service, in that fire is not an emergency to the fire department. It's an incident. And so 30 years in the fire service, I never responded to an emergency because it's not an emergency to me. It's simply an incident. So an incident by definition is a situation that needs to have trained responders with some form of a game plan in some sort of an organized fashion, bring that incident into resolution and bring things back to the state of normalcy. So when you think about that, an emergency is generally the viewpoint of the people that are on the other end of the incident. So the thing you mentioned is here's the airline. They can't get your reservation going, or they can't get the plane out of the gate. That's an emergency to you because you can't make your connection or you can't go wherever you want to go. But for those that are responding to that, they need to be calm, cool, collected, and they need to have some sort of an approach to solve that problem. So if you think about incident management, what it really is a people-to-people mechanism in order that the responders can organize themselves, manage, have a leader appointed as the incident commander, and to drive that incident to resolution so that at the end of the day, the system environment, the house is not burning, the IT environment's back up, whatever it happens to be, is a return to normalcy. So you can look at it as that incident management is in some ways kryptonite for chaos, and that you come in, you implement this, and hopefully at the end of the day, the problem gets resolved as good as it could, and you're back in business.
You absolutely need to turn that kryptonite or incident management is kryptonite for chaos into a T-shirt or a bumper sticker. I will buy one. That is awesome.
You're our first customer.
Yay! All right. Well, another question, we kind of answered the question, what is incident management there? How does incident management impact mean time to recover, or MTTR? This is an acronym I've heard thrown around a lot at DevOps conferences recently.
Well, this is Chris, and I'll handle that question. And I think, and I can tell you from our experience that having a process will dramatically reduce your MTTR. And I know there's discussion whether that's recover or restore. We have clients who have that discussion back and forth. But having an incident management process will definitely dramatically reduce. And as with our customers, we can't offer concrete results, but I know that we've seen anywhere from 35 to 75% increase or decrease in MTTRs, I should say, when they use incident management. Having a formal process, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but the key to an effective MTTR is having something defined as being in charge and having defined roles. And when you do that, everyone shows up to the incident knowing what they're going to do, as opposed to trying to figure out who's going to be in charge. And when you have an incident and there's no designated incident commander, in the absence of a commander, someone will step forward and become the commander. And that's generally not the right person to be in charge. And so when you look at that, the other thing we look at in addition to MTTR is MTTA, a mean time to assemble. And not a lot of companies track that metric. And that's an important metric. But if they do track it, they may not track it correctly. And a lot of times, if you need a DBA, as an example, they'll track the time from the time of the incident to the time the first DBA showed up, and not when the right DBA showed up. And you may get a junior DBA who's called. They answer the call. They join the call after 5 or 10 minutes. They do a little bit of digging around, and then they decide they've got to call somebody else on their team. And then that person joins the call 5 or 10 minutes later, and then they figure out they still have to reach out to somebody else. And when they finally get the right SME, the subject matter expert, that's when the MTTA clock stops. And we really want organizations to look at not only their MTTR, but look at their MTTA. When do they get the right resource, and figure out how to get that right resource there quicker? Because that's how you can resolve. There's a lot of times they'll go through this process. It may take them an hour to figure out who the right resource is, and then they get the right resource on and to resolve the problem within a minute or two after the right resource. So, but it does, overall, to answer your question, incident management, having incident management process will dramatically reduce your MTTR.
That's really interesting, some of the points that you bring up there. Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I just wanted to riff a little bit off what Chris was saying, and that is that, we've worked for some of the biggest stacks around the world, in Fortune 500, Fortune 50 financial services, to companies that have been in business for a few years. And we always ask this question: is there a single person anywhere in your organization who understands your stack in intimate enough detail to fix any part of it? Of course, the answer is always no, right? Because people operate very large, complex, and growing environments. And so if a problem occurs in the production environment and there's not a single person who can resolve it, then by definition, we're going to be looking for more than one person, or have a team of subject matter experts. Because what might look like a network event may in fact be a security event in disguise. What may look like corruption in the database could be, customers' workflows that because of customization on their side are driving, high CPU. So once we need a team, we need a leader of a team. And this is the kind of the break point, I think, for what Nell was asking before, and the difference between what is an incident. And we always ask customers to, in their own mind, describe the difference between a ticket and an incident. And ticket could be a single resource that fixes it. An incident is a team. And if we have a team, then we need a leader of a team, and then we need to unpack a big, complicated problem like the kind that Nell mentioned for American Airlines.
Yeah, I think it's I think all of that is super interesting. I'm well versed in terms like MTTD, mean time to detect, and then MTTR, but the MTTA is it's a new one to me. It sounds really interesting. It certainly feels like something that you can't really know what your MTTA is until you're doing some sort of post-incident review, because you may feel like at any point in time we have all the right people here. Now we're all assembled, and then as you dig deeper, you might discover that wasn't actually the case.
Yeah, it's a hard metric to gauge, because you make a call out through whatever notification system you use, you get a resource. And a lot of times that's a timestamp that the DBA showed up. And it's actually a manual process to figure out when you got the right DBA. So having a good after action review process is critical for you to figure out when you got the right person there, and to figure out, is there something in the monitoring that would have alerted you to call a different DBA or whatever SME you have to get the right person there. So it is a new concept, but it's a vital concept when you look at the after action review process to make sure that you're responding as rapidly as possible, which then reduces your MTTR.
Yeah, that's
you know what, I would throw this out there too. This is Rob again. Think about it this way: if you will never have the best MTTR unless you have the best MTTA. So even if you've got great people there, if they don't get there in the right amount of time, then you haven't optimized the whole process. And so when you think about it, I mean, this is a lesson from the fire service, and I don't think a lot of folks really understand that. Is that a lesson from the fire service is that most every fire department around has optimized its call out procedure, because that's the only thing you can control. And people in the IT space a lot of times say, oh my God, it took us 5 hours to solve that. That must have been a terrible problem. Well, I can tell you sometimes it just is a 5-hour problem, because that's the delta. Maybe I can solve it in 2 minutes. Maybe I can solve it in 2 hours. Maybe I solve it in 2 days, but I have no control of that. But what I do have a control over, and again, a lesson from the fire department, is you pick up 911 from wherever you are. The person that answers it generally has a minute to figure out what your problem is and get the right people launched. When the bell goes off in the fire station or the fire hall, whatever you call it, they generally have a minute to figure out where they're going, get their gear on, get oriented, get to the unit, and go out the door. And in many metropolitan areas, it's about a 5 to 7 minute travel time. So from the time you say, oh my God, I got a problem, to the time somebody shows up at your door, in most cities, and certainly all major cities, 7 to 10 minutes, you've got solution at your front door. And that happens fairly routinely. So what doesn't happen is you tone out a fire station and they say, oh, well, the fire's right across the street and we've got 5 to 7 minutes to get there. Let's have a cup of coffee before we go across the street. You know, we don't do that. So we're in the right now business regardless. But, you know, when you think about it, the idea is to identify the problem, get the people dispatched, not notified. That's a difference. We can talk about that later. Get them on the road, in quotes, right to the problem, show up on the conference bridge or whatever comms channel. And if the MTTA is solid, you got the best. Then the MTTR is what it is. And then you can say, oh yeah, we solved it in 5 minutes or 5 hours or whatever it happens to be. And you're sort of pointing the finger in the right direction of, did we solve it as rapidly as we could have when taken in total?
Yeah, just kind of amending as well what Rob and Chris said, and that is that if you go to a fire, it's pretty easy to see, if you were in a neighborhood, which house is on fire. So you could look down the block and say, not on fire, not on fire. Oh, that's the one on fire, right? So we get eyes on the problem. Except we can walk into anyone's data center or look in their environment, and I could be literally standing next to the physical machines, and I cannot tell you which of the network elements is carrying the DDoS attack, or which one of the servers is not responding for whatever reason. And so what we need is eyes on the fire, and that's what the subject matter experts do. So the quicker we can get them assembled is the quicker that they can get into their tools, and the quicker that they could start seeing what's happening in the environment, because as a commander, we need to see eyes on the fire. Well, our SMEs are the people who give us the eyes on the fire, because there's nothing else to be seen except through our monitoring tools, through our analytics, through any of the archives we have on previous incidents. And that's how we get a proper size up to make sure that we have the right experts attacking the problem together under cohesive leadership of an incident commander. And it is definitely true that there are 3 separate tracks in any well-defined incident management program. That's the track of command. That's the person in charge and the framework they use for organizing people. There's the track of problem solving. That's all the subject matter experts, and the SMEs change depending on what's the nature of the problem. And then there's a separate track on communications, and that is that we want to make sure that we're communicating down, up, and out to anybody who needs to know about what's happening. And one thing's for certain, that the E of SME is expert. So we want the experts in those domains to get to the bridge or whatever's the comm channel at any company. You get there as soon as possible. And we always ask this question, which is, what's a minute worth at a particular company? Like, we were just doing a project for a very large delivery company that operates an airline, and their minute is worth $125,000 every minute of every day, plus any deals that might be in flight that don't get closed because there's an incident and other customers may see unreliable service. Oh, and then there's reputation risk. Oh, there's investor confidence issues. Oh, you violated trust. Oh, it turns out that you also took up a whole bunch of internal resources time that could have been working on the project that they were supposed to be working on. So it's almost a total cost of ownership of an incident, but we always start off with what's a minute worth, because we just want to focus people on time. So whether it's MTTD, mean time to detect, mean time to assemble, mean time to restore, the one common denominator is time. And you can't get it back. You can't make any more. You can only lose it or save it. And so proper incident management is all about saving time.
I think what I'm hearing also a little bit in what you're saying is, before we move on, I want to go over subject matter expert. So there's a classic book, you all might have read it in the DevOps world, called The Phoenix Project.
Yes.
And in it, there's a character named Brent, who is the only one who can fix the systems most of the time. So
Right.
It's a mean time to Brent whenever there's an incident at their company. How do you advise companies to avoid having that single point of failure? Like Brent is in surgery or something like that. I mean, how do you advise them to avoid having just one subject matter expert, or to spread that knowledge around a bit?
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's a tough one, because it's easy to rely on that one resource that can always solve your problem. But when you look at any incident response system, and I will ask your listeners to close their eyes right now and look at the word process.
But not if they're driving.
Not if they're driving, yes. Fair point.
Not if you're driving, yes. Good point.
Unless you're in an autonomous vehicle.
Right. So think about process. And we've developed an acronym that the P stands for predictable, the R is repeatable, the O is optimized, the C is clear, the E is empowerment to make decisions. The first S is scalable, and the second S is sustainable. So only setting the table there to say that any good response process has got bench strength, durability. It can be repeated. You can respond on Christmas Eve at 2 o'clock in the morning, the same time you do in the middle of July at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And we have to build a program bigger than Brent. So while it's easy to rely on that gunslinger, that's the personality, we call it, the gunslinger, who walks in the door. And, those of you that are listening to the podcast can't see this, but imagine the gunslinger from the Old West walking in the door and kicking the doors open and saying, I am here and I can fix all these problems. And so, yes, it's a temptation to use Brent and to call Brent all the time, but it's not a process-driven thing. It doesn't allow for bench strength. It doesn't allow for others to grow, because as the two S's in process indicate, you got to be able to scale and sustain. And Brent's not going to live forever, and Brent won't work there likely forever. And a good friend of ours has a great phrase in life that I think is a good one that applies here: learn all you can, share all you know. So, that builds robustness, and it takes individual contributors and puts them into a team environment.
Yeah, I can tell you, we had a client up in Boston a year or so ago, and they had a Brent as well. And the individual, and I can't remember what his name was, but he was being called 24 hours a day to solve problems. And he finally decided he had had enough, and the company offered a 6-month sabbatical. So he took his sabbatical, and off he went to the mountains with no cell phone, no email. And so they were really stuck with what to do after that point. And I can tell you, in the fire service, we do the same thing. And I was the same thing when I was special operations. My boss and I realized that we were single points of failure. We were killing ourselves. And we had to develop a training program to do a brain dump so we could train the other people and how to do what we were supposed to be doing. And so really we had to make our lives easier. And we find it's a common problem, and executives have got to figure out that they're killing their people and figure out how to train others to do that job. The others may not be quite as efficient, but they'll get through eventually, and eventually they'll be as good as the gunslinger was. And it broadens their bench.
Well, you know, one other tagline I'd like to toss in there, it's kind of an unintended consequence / risk, is that it creates the halo effect on people as well, where, you know, we always call Brent, and so Brent therefore will solve the problem. But I can tell you, in incident response, you ain't right 100% of the time. So people begin to abandon their own good judgment and their own ability to participate, and they say, well, good, Brent's coming, he'll fix it. But you know what? He could be wrong this time.
Yeah, I would also say too that we want to make a big distinction between the people and the machines. And so organizations will spend a lot of time and a lot of effort thinking about how they scale the machine environment. And I think we need to spend as much or more time thinking about how do we scale the people environment, the team environment. How do we develop better teams, and how do we develop better leaders? And the thing that happens in incident management is the same thing, which is, like on a monitoring system basis, you know, we get alerts one of two ways, from a machine or a person. Somebody calls a help desk, says this is not working, or some monitors fire some alerts. RCAs and after action reviews the same way. You know, the RCA is an attempt to understand the thing that broke and make sure it doesn't happen again. And the after action review is there to figure out how did the people respond to the thing that broke. And so we're trying to make our stacks more resilient, and we also need to make our people and our people response to a machine problem more resilient. And so taking along the same ideas of, you know, now with distributed computing and containers and microservices, you know, in an effort to kind of spread out concentrations of risk, we need to, Nell points out exactly the same thing, is we should start spreading out the concentration of risk on how the people respond and how the people participate in these systems.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd love to just have you all walk us through sort of what is the life cycle of an incident. And if you would, like, I think about, you know, some system alerted someone to a problem. So if you think about, Ron, you know, you had those 3 tracks of command, problem solving, and communications. Who are the people, or what are the roles responsible, and what does that sort of process look like? We talk about mean time to assemble. How many people are we thinking we need to assemble? What does that look like?
I'll toss it over to Rob on that one, then come in. Oh, Rob, you're on mute.
How did I look there? Like Marcel Marceau going through there?
You did, actually. It was super funny. The people on the podcast won't see that, but yes.
Yeah, good. So when you think about an incident, whether it's a building on fire or an IT issue, or it really doesn't matter what it is, they all have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And as we talked about, this MTTA is the front part, and where the incident life cycle begins is when the thing happens, whatever it is. So you got some sort of an IT problem, and that triggers a series of events. Next being, somewhere in the detection and monitoring system, it gets picked up, whether that's a customer that calls or whether something in your internal monitoring system alerts. But the thing is now identified. And what that then triggers there's where the complications start. Because after it's been noticed and notified, or after it's been discovered, we have to get into the system of dispatching resources. We find a lot of our customers have a perspective of, if we just call a bunch of people, they'll show up and get it figured out. And it's somewhat of a spray and pray approach, in that, more is better. And if we get everybody there, then the smart folks will figure it out. But there's too many pitfalls to talk about here on the show, why that doesn't work well. And I will draw back on that particular point into the fire service. In my own agency, if somebody called and reported a fire, not everybody self-selected to go, and not everybody decided they just wanted to run to the problem and see what was going on. So you have a predefined set of responders against a predefined set of problems. And that's sort of where you get it kicked off. And in the fire department, we call that a first alarm assignment. So you, Nell, in Seattle, I know the Seattle Fire Department very well. If you picked up your phone right now and said, hey, I think my house is on fire, 3, 4 fire engines, a couple of big ladder trucks, a chief, an ambulance, and some other folks, that's what would show up every single time.
I happen to be only a block away from the fire department, so it'd be even faster.
It would be faster. Well, since they got 5 or 6 minutes, they'd wait for the rest of that time before they come.
Yes, yes. Because who wants to go to a small fire now, right? I mean,
yeah,
right.
If it gets bigger, we can find it easier. So it's really important for companies to try and make a defined response against what their most common problem sets are, and just launch those people. Not going to be right all the time. But then it's up to the incident commander to dispatch further resources. So if you think about it, the thing happens, it's picked up in detection and monitoring, people get dispatched, and this MTTA concept is really kind of almost, if you imagine a chess player, once they make the move, they smack the timer on the side of the table. Once you can answer this question as a commander, do I have the right people in the right place to solve this problem? That's when you can hit the timer. And once the MTTA is set, then we hop over this gigantic wall into the resolution effort, and that's where incident management comes into play.
Hey, Rob, I want to interrupt you really quick. You've used this term incident commander a couple of times.
Yep.
I don't know what that means.
Okay, good question. So incident commander, if I'm the incident commander, I am the single entity, the single role that is responsible for providing clarity in the incident and driving it forward to resolution. Essentially, I am the boss of the response. We don't like to call them facilitators necessarily, because this is not a consensus-driven effort. It's a support-driven effort. So if I'm the commander, let's look at who I see on my screen right now. I see Ron, Nell, Nathan, and Chris, and everybody else in viewing land. I've got this pool of people here. We're conducting a interview, a discussion here, and Nathan's our incident commander. So he's driving it forward, and he's providing clarity and giving us direction and telling us which way we need to go. In the event that we have disagreements on a course of action, incident commander is supposed to make that decision. So in short, you can think about it this way. If incident, then incident command. No matter how big or small it is, it has to be there.
Okay, and one of the things you mentioned there is that there's one, right?
Correct.
So Ron and I can't share incident command.
Can't share it, but you can transfer it. So
Okay.
we could command. Think about this. Command is not a person. Command isn't Brent that shows up and always takes over things. In fact, we advocate that if you are a deep problem solver with deep technical expertise, you probably shouldn't be the commander, because mission creep happens, and I can start my life as the commander, and then I can mission creep right into the chief problem solver, and that's a bad combination. So commander should be the person who is really good at commanding, and it's a function, it's not a person. So I could transfer command to Nathan, Nathan could transfer to Nell, Nell could transfer to Ron, Ron could transfer to Chris, and as long as the function is filled, then the position is active.
Awesome.
Yes, but the commander also has, I think we spoke of this a bit earlier, there are a number of other roles in the incident management system that get deployed during the incident lifecycle to help the commander make sure that they've got the right amount of support to command the incident to the shortest mean time to resolve. And so a couple of other key functions we recommend is that there should be a scribe. And this could be even a more junior member of the team that is there just keeping track of all the assignments that the incident commander is making, getting timestamps on it, and then also setting timers such that if Nathan as the incident commander here, and if I was the network resource, and you'd ask me to go check my logs and get back in 10 minutes, then Nathan had just negotiated a contract, right? Gave an assignment with a time frame, and I have a responsibility on the other side of the contract to go and take my 10 minutes. If I need more, I ask for more. If Nathan can afford to give me more, he will. But we're making commands by function and with a time frame on it, and that's how we want to shrink time. And then, so we have a scribe that keeps track of all that. Then we also have a communications officer. So to Nathan's earlier point from the beginning of the show, top of the hour, and that is, what if we don't have the right people? Well, I need somebody to go get the right people, and that's our comms dispatcher. And then if we need people to go and speak outside of the incident or for the incident, then we recommend to organizations that they have a separate function. It's called a liaison officer, or an LNO, and this is the person who is not the incident commander, but could be the deputy incident commander, but is out there to talk to executives, provide the talking points to customers. Because one thing's for certain, if we can put the fire out, everything gets better. If we could resolve the incident, I mean, every organization we go to, the default mission objective for incident management is restore service, restore service, restore service, right? And when software was a product, and Microsoft shipped product but did not offer service like Azure, then it was like, oh, we'll ship product and somebody else will operate it. But now software is a service in just about everywhere you'd look, and people pay for 7x24 service, right? Nell at the beginning of the show said, hey, well, what about my American Airlines flight? Well, it doesn't matter if it's 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon. I would like to get on my plane and go where I said I wanted to go. So the idea that we have to communicate out on the incident, but it is definitely true. We get the right people working, looking, getting eyes on the fire. The incident commander's role is to protect the problem solver so they can keep solving the problem. And the LNO's role, the liaison officer's role, is to protect the incident commander from the outside world so that the incident commander can protect the problem solvers. Well, remember, put the fire out, everything gets better. We need eyes on the fire, and let's get the right eyes on the fire. The commander commands the team to get eyes on the fire and resolve, and the liaison officer goes out and communicates on behalf of the incident to anybody on the outside world that needs to be communicated to. And when that, good, yeah, and when that's working well, then we don't have commanders leaving conference bridges or comms channels to go brief out executives. We don't have executives coming into technical bridges saying, hey, what's going on? Or what's the RCA? Or what's, if they hear silence, it sounds like nothing's going on, but there could be just a lull in the action. So that LNO function is super critical relative to keeping everybody informed, because the only reason people go to the commander is because they want to get a single source of truth and the unvarnished bare metal truth. So if we can provide a function out there, then the commander commands, keeps the problem solvers directed and taking the decisions towards resolution, and then the LNO basically just keeps the rest of the world understood of what's happening at the moment.
A tech company I've seen that handles outward communications really well during incidents is Slack.
Yes.
And I mean, the thing about being in the tech industry is when you have an outage, everyone and their mother, it seems, gets on Twitter to complain about that outage, or to tweet at you to let you know there's an outage, even though you already know. So, I mean, the Slack, whoever mans the Slack Twitter account is extremely responsive during an outage, assuring people, yes, they're aware there's an issue, they're working on it, and apologizing for the inconvenience. It's nice to see that, particularly with a tool as widely used as that one.
Sure. Well, think of just what's happened just in California in the last couple of months, right? We had a large-scale wildland fire up in the wine country that raged on for 8 days, that destroyed almost 9,000 structures, and 44 people died, and about $10 billion worth of property loss. If we compare that to the tech industry, I mean, that'd be a Sev-Zero in anybody's environment. And yet, so we had, to your point on what Slack does, which is exactly what public safety does, which is we have to give the best, most pertinent, relevant, up-to-the-minute information, because people are making decisions and relying on it, right? So if my team's using Slack to collaborate and Slack's unavailable and I still have to collaborate, I need to know what's my plan B on this. And so whether it was floods in Santa Barbara or whether it was the hurricanes that went through Texas, this incident management system and the communications function that goes with it, super critical, because the affected communities, users, executives, internal employees, etc., all have to know, and we want to give them the best information on a regular cadence, such that they have trust that the team that's there to resolve can resolve. Because another thing that incident management really does is it reassures people that we will be back in service, right? And with the mission objective of restore service, but if people ask questions and the responders or the commanders or the LNOs don't have any really good answers, and so all of a sudden it's like, well, do we have the right people running the incident, right? So it's not just the incident, but now it's, should we reorganize the incident in the middle of the incident? And I would say every organization that provides a service, whatever that service is, at the end of the day, really, when you boil it all down, what they sell is trust. Yeah, you get American Airlines because you trust that they're going to get you from point A to point B when they said they were going to do it. If your, Salesforce, as an example, has a public trust posting page across all their instances. So everybody sells trust. If you're a package company, I trusted them to get some flowers delivered for Valentine's Day. I mean, they're in the package business, but they're really in the trust business, right? And so we rely on it as we organize our lives, either professionally or personally, on services. And if you have services, then you need 7x24 operations. And when they break, as they ultimately will, then we need to be able to resolve and restore service as soon as possible.
That's awesome. So, this show, the Food Fight Show, is about DevOps. And with DevOps, we have a bunch of principles that we sort of live by. One of those is that failure is an opportunity to learn. And to me,
100%.
An incident is nothing if not a failure of some sort. But the other thing that's super true about DevOps is we're all about collaboration. And this incident management system feels a lot more like command and control to me than it does collaboration. So where does the learning and collaboration come into play as part of this process?
Sure.
Yeah, well, I think I'd look at that a couple of different ways. Number one is command does not exclude collaboration. In fact, a command is a good way to focus and direct collaboration. And so what we like to say is not everybody has to think the same way, but we all have to think in the same direction. And that's what the commander does. And boy, think about it. It's analogous to DevOps, only your sprint is 5 minutes. It's not a week or two, right? So you are collaborating in a Indy car going around a circle because that's what an incident requires. You got to be, meaning the responders, have to be moving as quick as the incident is moving and collaborating as fast as that incident is moving. So it is a bit of a misconception, I think, that if you've got this commander, that commander standing on the bow of the ship with his saber drawn saying, this is the way we will do things, and being heavy-handed. But a good commander really isn't. A good commander can grab a hold of those folks, put the right people in the right place to solve the problem. And you all know it. Nell, I suppose you're a software engineer by trade. And we run into engineers all over the place. And engineers love to do two things. They love to solve problems, and more than anything else, love to be right. So
it's true.
We can get into this whole discussion, while Rome is burning, let's talk about why I'm smarter than you, right? And so this is where the commander comes in to draw the best out of the collaboration people, the people that are there to collaborate and move this thing forward. It's all about moving forward, and the commander's job is to do that.
Yeah, I would also toss in too that really there's really only two states of being in how we look at the world, and that is peacetime and wartime. And I wish there was a better word than wartime, because it connotes all kinds of negative things, but you get the sense of urgency around wartime. And in peacetime, I mean, this is a great peacetime conversation we're having here, because we have the luxury of time, right? And companies build themselves for peacetime, right? Nobody stands up and says, hey, let's build a business around continuously being out of service. I mean, no, I'm not sure people would sign up for it. But when they do out of service, then we need to make a very rapid shift into wartime so that we hit the mission objective of restore service, because customers pay for uptime, and they pay with money, and companies pay for downtime, and the currency that companies pay with is loss of revenue, loss of reputation, erosion of trust, erosion of investor confidence, and at the end of the day, those are pretty high prices to pay when you're not in service to the very people who are paying you to be in service 7x24. And so the idea on the wartime shift is we will shift into a command and control posture during wartime, because that's what the incident requires. But we're back to peacetime, then it's like we have the luxury of time, and we should take every opportunity to take preventative measures, right? We should have the right architecture, and we should think about single points of failure, and we should be thinking about how we de-risk opportunities and businesses. But we should do all those preventative things. And that's not to say, even if you do all of that, that incidents won't occur. They will. Sprinkler buildings burn down, right? So what we want to do is take every opportunity to prevent in peacetime, but be very crisp in the response to wartime, because the mission objective is restore service, because the business proposition is deliver service.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about this peacetime to wartime shift. And one of the peacetime activities that can occur, we talked about it earlier, is after action review. And want to define that term a little bit. And some people are probably familiar with root cause analysis, RCA, or post-mortem. We don't like post-mortem. We don't like that phrase because that implies death, and sometimes implies a punitive action for the review. So one of the peacetime processes, after you escape from the wartime, resolve the incident, and you're doing this review, root cause analysis, RCA, typically focuses on the technical problem, what caused the technical issue, mechanical issue, hardware issue. Where we want to look at an after-action review, we want to look at not only the mechanical side, the technology side, we also want to look at the people side. And that's where AAR, the after-action reviews. And there's two ways that you can do that. One is at the conclusion of the incident commander does what we call a tailboard briefing or tail step briefing. On the back of a fire engine, there's a very large bumper called a tailboard. And after a fire or rescue situation, the incident commander will get all the folks together, do a real quick review. What went well, what didn't go so well. And that only takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Just in case if they get another fire that day, they can make corrections on the fly. Incident commander on an IT bridge should do the same thing at the very end. What went well? What didn't go so well? Nothing formal, just real quickly to take care of those major issues that may have arisen during that call. The after-action review then looks at a more detailed situation where they look at what was MTTR, what was MTTA, what did it take, what were the alerts, what did we have to do, what do we have to, is there process things we've got to take care of? Is there things we can fix in the short term, or maybe a long-term issue, maybe a training issue, maybe a technology issue, maybe some technical debt that you have involved you've got to deal with that maybe just became identified. That whole purpose of this after-action review, and Rob talked about the incident life cycle, is to learn how the incidents went, learn what incidents are occurring, what you needed to fix those incidents, and then learn how to prevent them. Because a lot of places are putting out fires continually and never really look back to see what fires they're putting out. We really want organizations to look at what fires they're putting out and learn how to prevent them, because you're always going to have fires. Unless you lock down your infrastructure and make no changes, you're always going to have fires. And even if you do lock everything down, there's so much outside of your control that you're going to have problems that you're still going to have issues. You're still going to have fires to put out. So we really want people to be looking at how they can prevent fires, the major fires and minor fires, and then staff appropriately to handle those, but then how to make your life a little bit easier. Have your standardized response at the end. That's what an after-action review is.
Yeah, and I think words matter, right? So the after-action review is we're going to review the actions after they were taken, right? Let's not let a good crisis go to waste. What did we learn from it? Whether it's an exercise like game day, which is creating an incident environment to test the resiliency of the people in the incident response organization, or it's an actual incident, which is what did we learn out of it? Can we figure out where there were gaps and overlaps so we don't have to go solve the same problem again? All of which builds resiliency both in the machine stack and in the people organization.
That's awesome. Well, I love this conversation, and I think we could talk about it for another hour, but unfortunately, we don't have unlimited time. We are limited in the amount of time we have today. So what I'd love to do first is thank you all for coming on to this panel. And then let's move into the picks. So this is the point in the episode where we'll go around and ask each one of our panelists to share a pick with our audience. It could be a tip, it could be a whiskey or a beer, a bar, it could be a movie or a book that you're reading, technical, non-technical, what have you. So let's see, maybe Nell, can we start with you?
Absolutely. My first pick is so I used Evernote for a very long time, and even though I used a plugin called Alternote to make it dark mode because the white screen would sear my eyes, it didn't always sync up well. So I looked for an alternative, and the one I settled on was Quiver. And Quiver is another note-taking application, but the great thing is you can use Markdown really easily, and there's Vim key bindings for when you're doing code blocks. So it's kind of the programmer's dream come true. My second pick is both the U.S. and the Canadian women's hockey teams. A couple of weeks ago, I watched the gold medal game, and I've been watching women's hockey since the first Olympic gold medal, or Olympic. The first time it was in the Olympics 20 years ago, and the U.S. and Canada have dominated it for a long time, but the joy of seeing how they pushed each other and how they both become so good and then were so well matched in that gold medal game, it was the best hockey game I've ever seen, and I've seen quite a few of them. So that is my second pick, is the US and Canadian women's hockey teams.
That's awesome. Chris, over to you.
I've got a relatively simple one. Well, maybe not be so simple, but I have one. I have some Basil Hayden dark rye sitting on my shelf that I got, but it has 2 tonka beans in it. And I'm infusing the Basil Hayden with tonka beans. And tonka beans are available via your favorite online retailer that you can get. You don't want to put too many in, but it gives it a nice little flavor, that a cinnamon kind of flavor to it. But it's a unique flavor that makes your cocktails wonderful.
That's awesome. Chris, when you said a tonka bean, the only thing I could think of was a little yellow truck. So I was going to ask you, what is tonka?
Tonka toy does nothing to the flavor. The tonka bean adds great flavor.
It gets mineral flavor.
Yeah, the little truck is a little hard going down.
Yeah. But I highly recommend the tonka beans are used to make bitters. It's a bit part of the bitter making process, and Rob and I are. Rob is a much better bitter maker than I am. But we are extensive in our research into bitters, and a tonka bean it's a neat little thing to put into you can infuse anything with it, and it's a pretty good little pickup.
That's awesome. Well, a bitters and soda is my go-to mocktail, if you will. So I'll have to get with both you and Rob to get the best bitters in town. Speaking of, Rob, over to you for your pick.
Okay, well, I'll riff right off of that. If anybody in listener land out there has ever heard of oyster bitters, I made some oyster bitters using a couple of the tonka beans that Chris mentioned before, a little pinch of saffron, some peppercorns, a little high-proof alcohol that's unflavored, and about 12 and a half crushed up oyster shells. Let them sit, and it gives a very minerally, sort of earthy flavor to a cocktail. Manhattans they're awesome in. So if you're into cocktails, search around and see if you can find oyster bitters. Little side note too, I just bought a wood-fired oven to cook pizzas in, and we have been in a couple places where we made pizzas and cooked food in a wood-fired oven. If you're a cook and you're interested in extending out your bag of tricks, go look for a wood-fired oven. Last thing is, Nell, I'm going to give you credit for this, but IMS is kryptonite for chaos. And if you're out there in listener land and you're not happy with the way your incidents are running, there is a better way out there, and there is a battle-tested way that's been out there for almost a half century, and you're listening to the first little piece of it, and there's a lot of help out there, and you can sleep better at night.
Cool.
Awesome. Over to you, Ron.
Okay, so a few picks. First, riffing off the cocktail theme, because we literally travel the world in the pursuit of the perfect cocktail. And we do it in the last year, 14 countries, and have discovered some amazing speakeasy bars out there, or hidden door bars. I would tell you that there's a great scene for this in Singapore, of all places. One place called Operation Dagger that literally has dewars of liquid nitrogen behind the bar, and they They make their own ice cubes from distilled water on a shaker tray, and then they cube them using a stainless steel meat cleaver that's heated to with a butane torch until it's cherry red, and then you put the hot plane against the piece of ice, and you get perfect cubes, handmade. I also recently just changed up the classic Manhattan. So I substitute a very smoky mezcal for either bourbon or rye as the underlying spirit, with great results. And let's see, if anybody travels a lot, a great way for travel clothing is go check out Icebreaker. They make incredible merino wool undershirts and all kinds of outerwear. Stuff's great, and we've been on the road for weeks at a time with only it. And free tag bags. And I'm not a paid sponsor of any of these things, just so you know. But anyway, free tag make great messenger bags.
That's awesome. All right, and for my picks, I have well, actually, I have 3 today. The first is a blog post that was recently done by a friend and coworker of both mine and Nell's, Matt Rock. He recently wrote a blog post called Course Correction, in which he talks about being a year into sort of changing the way he's approaching life. Matt was essentially reaching a place of burnout, and shares a lot of what he's done to get himself out of that and onto a really good track. I thought it was a very honest, personal post, but I think it resonated and may resonate with a number of people across our community. So that's my first pick. My second pick, because of who I am and what's coming, I have to pick ChefConf because I think it's the best conference that happens in this space throughout the year. So please do get some tickets for that. And then the final thing, I want to go back to something that was said at the top of the episode. Responding to incidents and being, I think it was Rob, you said this about being on the fire service. You have trained responders that show up to a thing. And so I think it is really important as we sort of wrap up this show to think about that. How are you training your responders? Of course, the folks over at BlackRock 3 are offering a course coming up. I would definitely recommend that. But in any case, I think that it's important to take some time and be thoughtful and intentional about how are you getting yourself and your team ready for incident response. So those are my 3 picks. Nell, do you want to take us out?
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone here on the panel, for being here today. Learned a lot about incident management, and I'm sure there's going to be more discussion over Twitter and in the Slack. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening to us. Remember to check out ChefConf. And with that, I think that's it. Nathan, any last words before we go?
Until next time, chefs, keep it hot.
Keep it hot.
Keep it hot, baby.